And we're back with the LMS show. My name is Lenny Matthews, and a century-long battle to integrate New York's bravest. You know, as the old Fats Domino song go, ain't that a shame? Okay. I'd like for you to meet, first of all, I want you to meet one of my interviewers, Cassandra Mary. Get over Cassandra Mary. You can clap now, yeah.
Thanks for having me back,
Thank you. You're a dynamic speaker, Cassandra Champion.
Thank you so much. It's really a privilege to be here.
And the young lady who wrote this book, how many years did it take?
I reported on it for 10 years, but I had to write it in about a year.
Wow.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Superman, as they would say at the beginning of Superman, we'll just leave it at this, she writes for a big metropolitan newspaper. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ginger Adams-Otis. Give her a big hand. How are you?
Good.
We had a book club meeting, and you were here the last time for the book club meeting, and we, usually I don't want to sit back and say they don't like to buy hard covers, hard copies, but they bought this one because we were pushing this, and later on they came back and gave it a very good rating. It's true. It's a true story. And they gave it a 10 overall. They gave it to everybody voting, and everybody threw it. Yeah, I give it a 10. I give it a 10. I give it a 10. In the book, you profile two persons involved, but you didn't. One thing I admire about you didn't go scattered all over the place. You profiled like in the early of the century, and then later on in the century, you profiled Wesley Williams. Who was Wesley Williams?
He was the third black firefighter in New York City. But we think of him as the first black firefighter, generally speaking, because he's the first one that really burst through in 1919. He was from a Harlem family. He was an incredibly gifted man, physically and intellectually. He was an autodidact, self-taught. He left school in 6th grade here in Harlem, and he was that new breed. The generation of the waves were starting to come up then of the Great Migration from the South, and he was that new breed who was going to make a difference. He would have been perfectly at home on Stryber's Road because he was just determined that he was going up several stations in life. And it wasn't about accruing money or wealth per se, but it was about, I'm not going to be stuck down where society decides that I'm going to stay. I'm going to fight my way up into a more prosperous lifestyle so I can care for my family. And he was emblematic of an entire generation of people that were coming up saying, we want our American dream. We want our share.
He took the test for the fire department, right?
Right, yep. So in 1919, just like today, same exact civil service system, Wesley Williams sat down and he took a written exam to become firefighter. That's problem number one with how this whole system works, but we'll get there. And he scored incredibly high, 97.
Wow.
And now, just let me say, back then, there was no civil rights law, there was very little attention paid to any of these exams. One of the questions back then was, at what temperature does glass explode? Right? They could put anything that they wanted on these tests. So you had to be really prepared. They were far more difficult than they are today. Because today, by law, you cannot test somebody on what they already know about a job for an entry-level position, right? So you don't have to prove now, when you're starting an entry-level job, that you already know X, Y, and Z. Back then, they would have questions based around how thick is a steam pipe, and if you cut it here, at what length do you do this, do you do that? You had to know so much. And of course, if you were already in a firefighting family, these were all things you knew.
But you have a question?
No, I'm just finding it's very interesting. I was like, where do they come up with these questions? It's like ludicrous.
It's firefighters wrote the exam back then, and for most of New York City's history. So you can imagine, I won't bog us down in all the details, but you can just imagine how stacked that whole colorblind, merit-based civil service system was at that time. So Wesley Williams, he studied hard, and the deal was you kind of didn't know, you had to be prepared for anything. And he got a 97. Then he went on to the physical exam, and he got a perfect 100. And he was only the third man ever in the fire department to get that score.
Wow.
And back then, you also had to have a letter of recommendation. And I could not find the actual letter, but this is the family story, and it's been repeated enough that it's probably true.
Did you interview his family?
I did interview all of his relatives, his grandson, many, many family members, and he had a letter of recommendation from Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, wow.
So you would think he would be hired, but he was waitlisted. Yeah. But a year later, from some back channels from various family members that he had, who had, they're in his own right, that's an incredible story, he was finally sent a letter saying you can report for duty January 10th, 1919 in Engine 55, 363 Broome Street.
That's on Louisa, right?
In the heart of Little Italy.
Italy, right.
Right, because if you're a black firefighter and you live up here, of course the fire department is going to make you go all the way down there. And they said deliberately that they chose a neighborhood far away because they didn't want his friends coming around the firehouse. And so that's how he got started. That's how he broke in.
I was reading in the book also too, they talked about this black bed. I mean, only for the black guys to sleep in that black bed. Is that true?
Yeah, well, Wesley Williams, he was the only black firefighter in his entire house. There were two firefighters who came before him. Very quickly, I'll just tell you, they had a really rough time. You talk about rough, they had it rough. The first one was, Woodson and William Nicholson. His great-great-granddaughter lives here in Harlem. He came up through Brooklyn, and he was from Virginia. And when he came onto the fire department in Brooklyn, right before the two cities unified, he got stationed at a house in what's now today would be like Park Slope. And if you go to the Schomburg Center in Harlem, the fire log from that firehouse is there. See, every single day it says, Williams showed up to work, was sent to the veterinary unit. So every day he came to work in his uniform, when they finally gave him one.
That's when they had horses, right?
And then he sent him off to work in the horses, because at that point horses still did the things, because they did not want a black man with them in the firehouse. They did not want him fighting fires. It was a very prestigious job. They didn't want to share it, but they decided that since, this is what they said, he had a natural ability with horses, that they would send him to work in the veterinary stable every single day, and it's written in the log. You can see it there.
How that black bed came about?
So then another gentleman came in, Woodson, again from Brooklyn. He survived, but the big one was Wesley Williams in 1919. And with only one black person in the house, it was always, the white majority would say, you're sleeping over there. In Wesley Williams' case, they didn't talk to him his whole first day, and they said, we'll let you, eventually they said, we'll let you join in and we'll talk to you, but you take your bed and you go to the basement. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And if you want to try to make me, good luck to you. And so they did not take him up on that offer at that time, but they eventually did. But they did, his bed had to be over by the latrine. It was the worst bed, and that was going to be his bed. And so Wesley, it was a long time before any other African Americans started to come in significant numbers. It was a very easy system to manipulate. And not long after Wesley Williams, of course, the Great Depression happened. New York City was just flooded with people who were looking for jobs, and the municipal jobs, city agency jobs, everyone wanted to get on those. So the one test the fire department gave in the 1930s was it became known as the bartender's list, because so many white-collar people, men, we're all talking men obviously at this point, so many white-collared men applied for this job that they normally would never have done it, and while they were waiting to get hired, they had to work as bartenders. So the competition was incredibly fierce, and around the 1940s, they ended up getting about almost 50 black men to come in, and Wesley Williams was at that time an officer. And when the department saw 2001, and we're finally getting the street for him, it happened literally just today on this corner. But Captain Washington was there with former Attorney General Eric Holder and many other members of the Vulcan Society. So Wesley Williams started it in the 40s, but it continues today. And Captain Washington was really a key figure in taking the Vulcans in the early 2000s and challenging Mayor Bloomberg in New York City on basically on the validity of how they applied the civil service tests and the hiring process as a whole for the fire department. Because what they argued successfully in court was that the written exam was weeding out too many black and Latino applicants because there was no correlation to how your score was to how good of a firefighter you would be. And yet the competition was so intense. If you didn't score a 95 or above, and really a 97, right, is the big cutoff. If you didn't score incredibly high, you had no shot at getting on the job. None at all. And it really wiped out the numbers of African American and Latino applicants in huge, disproportionate numbers. Now, the ugliness of this was that got really twisted in the media, and it became...
How it got twisted in the media?
Because, I mean, I work in the media, I understand, if it bleeds, it leads, is how they go, so they wanted to always sex this up. And there was a majority in the firehouses that were very angry about what the Vulcans were saying, and they were saying, it's special treatment, this and that. So what they'd say is, hey, if the African Americans can't pass the test, they shouldn't be dumbing down the test, so make it easier for them. That's a total fabrication of what was actually happening. African Americans passed the test in large numbers, proportionate to how many applied. Passing the test, which is a 70 or above, doesn't matter. If you don't have a 97 or a 95 on a good year, you are not getting that job.
That job's every 4 years, right?
It takes sometimes 4 to 7 years to get hired. So Lenny could go in and get a 93, and I would get a 97. He might actually be the better firefighter. Maybe he's a little calmer under pressure. Maybe he, doesn't scream and shout when things go wrong. Maybe he's better at getting along in a firehouse. Maybe he's actually more empathetic with the public. He might have a whole set of skills that would make him better suited for that job, but we would never know because he got 3 points lower than me on a written exam.
Are they doing anything to rectify the situation?
Yes.
Well, it's very difficult because the city's attachment to civil service runs really deep. The Vulcan Society and Captain Paul Washington, they challenged this successfully in the courts. It was a bloody legal battle. It took over 10 years. It cost all of us taxpayers $98 million when the city inevitably lost, which everyone but Mayor Bloomberg and his lawyers seemed to know was going to happen, but they went in anyway. And so the fire, it's Play-Doh money to them, yeah. But the fire department has since Mayor de Blasio came in, settled the last bit of the lawsuit. Since then, the number of black firefighters in New York City, in the New York City Fire Department, has doubled. So now, before you get excited, let me tell you that means they've gone from roughly 300 to roughly 600 out of a force of about 11,000. But they have doubled in 2 years more than they had in 30 from the 1970s onward, right? So there's more emphasis, there's more progress. They changed some of the tests. The biggest thing, though, really, it wasn't just the test. It was if you passed the test, then you would have a background. All kinds of things. And in every step of this way, it was a textbook case. Professors could take this and dismantle it and sort of teach institutional racism, how it builds up over time and how traditions and practices get put in place before we ever thought about civil rights, before we ever had discussions about equal playing fields, and how these mechanisms do not get fine-tuned as we go along. And the reasons for that are myriad. Negligence, neglect, and latent racism that is in there. Why change a system that's working for you? If it's not working for someone else, that's not your problem. So the fire department was a real cauldron of all of this stuff.
But they tried to do. I noticed that they, I was at the shopping at the mall the other day, and they're trying. They was out in the street over in Brooklyn, at the train station. They're trying to do some kind of recruiting for people, and also too they had problem recruiting because every time you turn around, they switch the diversity person around. There's different people in there.
And it has a difficult reputation that's built up over the years, as you were talking about with the young man. They don't always help themselves. They're their own ambassadors and emissaries. They're out in the neighborhoods and in the community. They're not always carrying the right message. The fire department does try to recruit, but one of the biggest things that they did was when you went through the background process, if you got tripped up on something, there was no mechanism in there within the department for anybody to check it. And so if the person at this desk decided that you, as a candidate, you had something in your background...
Because it looked like apparently what I was reading in this book, it got treated, a black person, say he dropped a piece of paper in the street and he gets a ticket for it. And maybe he didn't go to court, wherever it is. And you have the other one, the Caucasian, he beat somebody up in the street or, and have a fight in the bar. And then they say, the records are public, and then somebody turns and say, well, look, they'll take it upstairs to one of the people that get the background check, pass this by.
Yeah, so basically the fire department did not have any of what we would call best practices for human resources. So, they fixed the test, but another big part of that was that now the fire department, they have to really justify, when they go through the whole hiring practice, why is this person disqualified? Why is this person disqualified? Before, it all happened in secrecy, wasn't discussed. There were even no notes.
Cassandra, do you have a question?
I'm just amazed and want to thank you for all the hard work that you've done to bring this to light, to make us informed, because we all knew that there was some kind of something going on, but we didn't exactly know exactly what. What other little tidbits would you like to give us a little teaser on your book?
There is a romance. I will not give it away. It's not Captain Paul Washington. He's happily married. But Wesley Williams, there was way more to him than met the eye. And he was a fascinating character. So he has a really colorful background.
You got to read the book. I thank you so much. Give your Adams-Otis. And we'll see you soon with more of LMS. And take it down.